Let's focus on a crazy man that lost his head. Literally. He was the quintessential Western outlaw, straight out of central casting of the old days, robbing stagecoaches and trains and killing anyone that ran afoul of him in the dry and dusty lands of the desert southwest of the still undefined United States. He was at times the leader of his own band of marauders, but was alternately associated with the infamous Hole-in-the-Wall gang, which was composed of many loosely affiliated gunslingers, most notably the famously memorialized Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And as we tell our story, we need to keep in mind that by definition, much of what he did, or was purported to have done, is difficult to faithfully corroborate. This is what makes that time and era so fun and interesting and the stuff of legend. So we'll throw the facts out there as we know them to be, but we'll also allow some supposition and intrigue as to the real dastardly deeds of this man. Well, this murky character is Black Jack Ketchum. We'll cover his calamitous life and also his inglorious end, for which he is most remembered, so stay tuned for that. Hello again, friends, and welcome to another episode of Well Hung History, where we tell the true tales of the condemned and the executed. My name is Terry Allen, and thanks for joining us. Dust off them spurs, hop along a wild horse, and join us on a wild ride to the dark side. Black Jack Ketchum was born Thomas Edward Ketchum in San Saba County, Texas, on Halloween of 1863. But like any great renegade or gangster, we'll refer to him by the moniker to which he was known during his lifetime and ever since, and that's Black Jack Ketchum. Now, why was he handed this name? Was he black? No. Was his name Jack? No. Was he a great poker player? Did he don a dark-colored duster a la Johnny Cash? We don't know for sure. What we do know is that he earned this ignominious name for a pretty bland reason, and that was because he was frequently mistaken for another outlaw operating in the exact same region at the exact same time, and his name was William, quote, Black Jack Christian, the leader of what was known as the High Fives gang. His doppelganger also robbed trains and stagecoaches in the uncharted West, as well as Mexico proper, and he was killed in a shootout near Nogales, Arizona in 1897. And as a fun aside, San Saba just also happens to be the hometown of the famous actor Tommy Lee Jones, whose long career includes many westerns, probably most memorably in this genre as Woodrow Call in the Lonesome Dove series. I find it interesting to note that during his lifetime, Ketchum never really lived in the properly designated United States as constituted today. He was born in Texas, then part of the Confederacy, and he died in, well, you'll have to listen through to hear what comes later. He worked as an ordinary cowpoke and cattle rustler in Texas until migrating next door to the New Mexico territory with his brother Sam while still in his 20s. It was there that we see him first run into some serious trouble with the law, when he and Sam and some others robbed the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad near Deming, New Mexico. The town, more of a watering hole, was actually Nutt, New Mexico, N-U-T-T, which I just had to say for fun. And the current population at the time of this recording is 12. Yep, 12 lonely and thirsty nut jobs. But trust me, Deming ain't New York either, and your narrator knows this to be true, as he has been there on at least 3 forgettable occasions. The small motley crew of the Ketchum boys and their friends managed to abscond with a modest amount of loot from the train and then hightailed it to the borderlands of Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming, where they sought refuge at the ranch of a cowboy named Herb Bassett. Now, who was Herb Bassett? And why did they seek safe harbor at his compound? No, he was not an outlaw himself, but he was known to provide provisions and sanctuary to those that were. His ranch essentially served as a safe house in the inhospitable lands that were all but out of reach from the long arm of the law. He was renowned for harboring fugitive outlaws, including Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, as well as a sundry cast of other legends of the Old West, among them Kid Curry, News Carver, Elsie Lay, the tall Texan Ben Kilpatrick, Deaf Charlie Hanks, Dave Atkins, and countless others. Other colorful characters there included Herb's daughters, Josie and Ann, both of whom were renegades in their own right, and eventually would become love interests of various members of the gunslingers that would hole up in the hole. Another female outlaw who was also a regular at the hideout was Laura Bullion, and that is a great name for that place and time, and she would also become known to be romantically linked to some of the same men. So now we've got not only a crime story, but a sex story as well. But I suppose that was to be expected, as there surely could not have been many mating options in such a remote and desolate locale. After leaving the Bassett Ranch, the Ketchum brothers were joined by Kilpatrick, Carver, Atkins, as well as another legendary character of the time, Bronco Bill Walters. They came and went, it seems, and they variously robbed stagecoaches and trains in the very sparsely populated Arizona territory. The loosely formed gang slipped back into Texas, where they were variously accused of murdering a saloon owner named John Jap Powers in December of 1895, but they were able to skip town before being legally implicated. The following year, Black Jack and his crew were fingered in another killing, this time back in New Mexico. This involved the mysterious disappearance and presumed murders of Albert Jennings Fountain and his son Henry near Las Cruces in early February of 1896. The elder Mr. Fountain is a very interesting footnote in the history of the Old West. He wore many hats in his time, and not all of them 10-gallon. He was variously a lawyer, a soldier on the Union side, and a politician, having served myriad political roles in California, Texas, and the New Mexico territory. A noted legal client, if you can call it that, of his at one point was none other than Billy the Kid, William Bonney, maybe the most memorable of them all. He had also worked as a reporter in his early days and had been assigned to cover the exploits of the American adventurer and self-proclaimed president of Nicaragua, William Walker, who had ordered his execution, only to see Fountain escape Central America and back to the relative safety of California. And if you're interested in real esoteric history, as we are, check out a soon-to-be-released episode about Walker on our companion channel, Lost and Unfound. But years later, he and his son met their comeuppance in New Mexico. Though Ketchum and company were widely believed to have been culpable of complicity in the killings, as they were known to be in the exact area at the same time of the events. They once again rode out of town and were never officially indicted or tried. Still in New Mexico, the Ketchum gang is soon implicated in another multiple murder. This took place in June, the same year, at an outpost called Liberty, and that's just near Tucumcari and the Texas border. This time the victims were a merchant called Levi Hertzstein and one of his employees, Herman Gallegos. The Hertzstein store had been robbed, and Levi and his brother Morris formed a small posse to hunt down the perpetrators. They caught up with the Ketchum crowd in the nearby desert, where a classic shootout ensued. Levi H. and Gallegos were mowed down almost immediately, and another member of the posse was wounded and would go on to implicate Blackjack and his crew. Once again, considering the massive landmass and the dearth of population and the law, they absconded once again, this time dispersing across the hinterlands and making regular appearances at the hole in the wall. The gang, sometimes including Blackjack, sometimes not, continued robbing stagecoaches in the wide swaths of the region, mostly in the Arizona and New Mexico territories. In the summer of 1899, Sam Ketchum, Elzie Lay, News Carver, and others were tracked down by a posse led by Sheriff Ed Farr and, quote, Special Agent W.H. Reno near the Colorado-New Mexico border. Now here comes another John Wayne, Clint Eastwood shootout. But this time Sam Ketchum was badly wounded, and his wounding slowed their escape. But the posse assembled to hunt them and were hot on their trail, and within days, bullets are flying again, this time with Sheriff Farr and another lawman, Deputy W.H. Love, were taken out. But this was the end of Sam Ketchum, as he was arrested at a nearby ranch, and then transferred to prison in Santa Fe, where he too succumbed to his earlier wounds. Elzie Lay, too, was arrested, and he was sentenced to life for the killing of Sheriff Farr. But he was eventually released in 1906 after protecting the warden and his family at the jail where he had been residing during a prison uprising. Following his early and unexpected release from confinement, he seems to have finally sworn off a life of mayhem, and he went on incredibly to live for decades more, eventually passing away in Los Angeles in 1934. For the record, Kid Curry's end came controversially, but unsurprisingly, in a shootout in Colorado in 1904 during the period of Lay's incarceration. So let's throw it back in reverse and get back to the star of our show, Black Jack Ketchum. Well, following his brother's death in 1899, his days too were numbered. That same year, he decided to rob the exact same train that ran between the dusty outposts of Folsom and Des Moines, New Mexico. The exact same line that Sam and others had robbed the month before. Now, why did he make such a brazen and boneheaded move? We'll never know for sure, but it's likely that he was not fully aware of what had transpired there, nor necessarily the doomed plight of his brother. Not only did news travel slow in those days, it would have been largely inaccessible to this particular region of the country or future country. As he galloped on horseback toward the train, he was recognized by the conductor, a man named Frank Harrington, who grabbed a shotgun and shot and unhorsed the bandit, leaving him very badly wounded by the side of the tracks. Ketchum was located the next day near where he had been felled, and he was transported to Trinidad, Colorado, the only settlement of any meaningful size in the region. It was there that his right arm was amputated. So much for gunslinging at this point. like a slot machine. He was truly now a one-armed bandit. And after a brief convalescence, he was then transported to Clayton, New Mexico, to stand trial for his numerous crimes. This town would mark the end of the line for the famous train robber. I suppose it's obvious to say that the outcome of this frontier trial was a foregone conclusion. It was swift, and it predictably ended in a sentence of death by hanging. But despite all of our Hollywood images, the reality is that Ketchum remains the first and only person sentenced to hang in Union County, New Mexico. And so therefore, nobody really possessed the knowledge of how to properly carry out the final deed. And this is precisely why the gruesome final act is most notorious, if not so well remembered today. It certainly was by those who witnessed it, and by all accounts, horrified many of them for the rest of their lives. On April 26, 1901, Thomas Ketchum was escorted to the crudely constructed gallows in Clayton. It is said that a majority of the sparse population of the surrounding settlements came to witness this gruesome spectacle. He asked for the customary black hood to be placed over his head, which was granted, but then it was removed, as famous photographs later reveal. True to legend, he was strong and steadfast. As the noose was placed around his neck, he was even ornery. He did not weep, and he did not confess to his obvious crimes. He kept a stiff upper lip, presumably a stiff upper neck. Instead, in true West style, he reportedly demanded of his executioners, quote, "Dig my grave deep, very deep, and hurry up." The sheriff of the town, Salome Garcia, cut the rope from a hatchet and the trap that held his body, and this is what was recorded. Quote, "His body shot down with all of its weight. Everyone, within or without the stockade, held their breath, and their hearts gave a great bound of horror when it was seen that his head had been severed from his body by the fall. His body alighted squarely upon its feet, stood for a moment, and swayed and fell, as then great spurts of blood spurted from his severed neck, as to shame the very ground to which it poured. The head rolled aside, and the rope, released, bounded high, and fell upon the scaffold from whence it came."
This concludes the latest episode of Well Hung History. Run away and cry now, but before you do, make sure to subscribe and leave us a killer review. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the rest. New episodes drop regularly. Tom Payne Productions, all rights reserved and preserved.